When people talk about family, they usually think about warmth, support, and Sunday dinners where everyone laughs at old memories. For me, family always felt like a chessboard, calculated moves, unspoken power plays, and every piece quietly waiting for someone to make the wrong move. My name's Adam. I'm 33 years old, and up until a few weeks ago, I lived in a house that held every memory I had of my dad, both the good and the complicated. It wasn't a mansion, but it was solid. 2 stories, red brick, wraparound porch, and that old maple tree out front that he swore he planted himself in '88. I used to believe I'd grow old in that house too, maybe raise a family of my own one day. But everything changed the moment my stepbrother, Kyle, said 7 words I'll never forget. Dad left me the house. Start packing. Now, Kyle, he's always been a problem. We were both 17 when our parents married. My mom had passed away years earlier, and his mom, Deborah, came with a full-grown son and a chip on both their shoulders. From the outside, it might have looked like a blended family. But behind closed doors, it was anything but. Kyle and I never bonded. He was the kind of kid who thought sharing was beneath him. If I left orange juice in the fridge, he'd drink it just to say he did. If I got a B+ on a test, he'd somehow accidentally knock my notes into the trash. High school was bearable because I had friends and basketball and a part-time job at the local auto shop. But at home, it was like walking on eggshells, especially with his mom acting like Kyle was the second coming of Einstein. My dad, to his credit, tried to play peacemaker. He wasn't oblivious. He'd pull me aside sometimes and say things like, "Just ride it out, Adam. College will open doors." Or, "You've got the heart, son. That's what matters." I think he felt guilty. Guilty for dragging me into a ready-made family that never truly saw me as one of them. But I never blamed him. He loved Deborah in his own quiet way, and she made him smile again after years of mourning. That had to count for something, right? Fast forward to a few months ago. Dad had been dealing with some health issues. A stroke 2 years back left him a bit slower, and I started helping out more around the house. Grocery runs, sorting his medication, even fixing up the leaky roof last winter. Kyle, meanwhile, had moved out 5 years earlier, chasing some startup fantasy in Austin that crashed within the first year. Since then, he'd been floating, living in rented condos, chasing quick money, and only showing up when he needed something. And yet, every time he visited, it was like the air got heavier. He'd smirk like he knew something I didn't, criticize the way I maintained the yard, or joke about how the old man's running out of time. Then Dad passed. Quietly, peacefully, in his sleep, thank God. It was early September, just as the leaves were starting to turn. I found him that morning, still clutching the photo of my mom he kept by his bedside. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at him, feeling this weird mix of sadness and relief. He wasn't in pain anymore. No more hospitals. No more blood thinners. Just rest. Eternal, silent rest. The funeral was modest, just like he would have wanted. A handful of old neighbors, some distant cousins, and Kyle, who showed up 15 minutes late wearing a suit that looked like it had been balled up in the back of his car. He didn't cry, didn't speak, barely looked me in the eye. And as people started leaving the church steps, he pulled me aside with this smug grin that made my stomach drop. "That was nice," he said, adjusting his sunglasses. "Real touching." I nodded, still numb. He would have appreciated it. There was a pause. Then he said it. Just like that. Like he was telling me the weather. "Dad left me the house. Start packing." At first, I thought he was joking. I actually let out this short, awkward laugh and said, "What are you talking about?" Kyle leaned in, eyes gleaming. He changed the will. Left it to me. I saw the paperwork. "No, he didn't," I said, feeling something twist in my gut. "He never mentioned that. And he promised. He told me I'd be able to stay." Kyle shrugged. "Well, guess he changed his mind." I wanted to punch him, right there in the church parking lot. But I didn't. I clenched my fists, nodded once, and walked away. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. The damage was done. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, condolences, and sleepless nights. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of my dad. The old radio on the kitchen counter still had his favorite jazz station saved. His jacket still hung by the front door. And yet, Kyle's voice echoed louder in my head than anything else. He started texting me the next day. Short, passive-aggressive jabs at first. "Just a reminder, don't start anything new in the garage. I'll probably turn it into a gym." Then, Deborah says the wallpaper in the living room needs to go. Hope you didn't get too attached. And finally, you've got 4 days, Adam. Make it easier on yourself. I tried calling the lawyer, Dad's longtime friend, Mr. Holbrook, but he said the will hadn't been officially opened yet. It was scheduled to be unsealed at the end of the week. Until then, nothing could be confirmed. No property transfer. No legal authority. But Kyle didn't care about that. He was already acting like the king of the castle. He even showed up unannounced one morning, walked in like he owned the place, and started measuring the walls. I'm thinking of knocking this one down, he said, tapping the hallway between the living room and den. Really open it up, you know? I stared at him. You don't live here. Not yet, he smirked. That was the moment I realized he truly believed it. Whether or not it was true, he had already claimed it in his mind. Like a kid calling shotgun and daring anyone to argue. He was so certain, so smug, and I was left scrambling, torn between grief, confusion, and this gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Because here's the thing, Dad was deliberate, thoughtful. He planned everything, from his monthly bills to the way he arranged his tools in the shed. He wouldn't have just handed Kyle the house without a conversation. Not after all the years I spent caring for him. Not after the promises he made. So either Kyle was lying, or someone else had interfered. And that's when I started digging. Through old papers, letters, notes Dad left in drawers. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Just something, anything, that proved Kyle wrong. What I found wasn't what I expected, and it changed everything. But I'll get to that. Because 4 days later, when the will was finally unsealed, Kyle strolled into that office like a man walking into his inheritance. And he was about to learn just how big of a mistake he made. For days. That's how long I had to pretend everything was normal while Kyle strutted around like some Wall Street executive who just closed a billion-dollar deal. And I wish I could say it was just his attitude, but no, he made sure those 4 days were a miserable countdown. Every hour, every minute, he found new ways to twist the knife. And I had to keep my cool, because if the will did say what he claimed, I needed to be ready. But deep down, something still didn't sit right. Dad wouldn't do this to me. Not without a word. Not without a reason. On day 1, Kyle showed up again. No knock. No text. Just the sound of the front door creaking open while I was trying to clean out the attic. I poked my head down from the ladder and saw him casually strolling in with a coffee in one hand and a small notepad in the other. What the, Kyle? You can't just walk in here. He didn't even flinch. Relax. Just getting a feel for the place. This isn't your house. He grinned. Not yet. You've got what? 3 days left. I came down the ladder slowly, wiping dust from my hands. The will hasn't even been read. Kyle tapped his notepad like he was a real estate agent. Just preparing. I'm thinking hardwood floors in the hallway. And I might finally tear down that ugly wallpaper in the dining room. Deborah always said it looked like a motel in Kansas. I stood there, arms crossed, heart pounding. You don't live here. Technically, neither do you. Not for long. He gave me a wink and wandered off toward the kitchen, inspecting the cabinets like he was shopping at IKEA. Also, just a heads up, we're going to need you out by noon on Friday. I've got movers coming. Movers? He'd already booked movers. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I went back up the attic ladder with shaking hands, heart in my throat, trying to focus on the boxes. That attic held decades of Dad's stuff. Old journals, tools, yellowed photographs, and receipts from every car oil change he ever had. I knew there might be something useful up there, some clue, something that told the truth. But every creak of the house now felt like a ticking clock. Day 2 was worse. Kyle came back with Deborah. She was wearing her usual over-perfumed cloud of entitlement and carried a designer tote bag like she was on her way to brunch, not someone else's home. Adam, she said as soon as she walked in. You're still here. I blinked. Still here? Deborah, my dad just died last week. She smiled tightly. Of course, and it's so sad. We're all grieving. But grief shouldn't delay responsibility. Kyle chuckled behind her like she'd just cracked the joke of the year. She's right. Gotta keep moving forward, right? I turned to him. You really brought her here? To Dad's house. Our house, Deborah corrected. And it's important I get a sense of the space. We'll probably host Thanksgiving here this year. It'll be nice to do something traditional. I stared at her, dumbfounded. You haven't spent more than an hour in this house in 5 years. She blinked, then turned to Kyle. Is he always this emotional? Kyle laughed again. Only when he's losing. I had to leave the room. I walked out onto the porch and sat on the swing Dad installed when I was 10. I could still remember him carrying it out of the truck, balancing the chains on his shoulders, saying, "This'll be our thinking spot, buddy." I must have sat there for over an hour, just breathing. I couldn't be in the same house as those two without blowing up. And I couldn't afford that. Not now. Not yet. They eventually left without a word, but not before I heard Deborah say, "We'll need to get rid of that swing. It creaks." That night, I opened one of the attic boxes and found something strange. It was a sealed envelope addressed to me. Just Adam, in Dad's handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. No date. No salutation. Just a few lines. "If you're reading this, it means I've left more behind than I meant to. Don't trust what they say. You were always the one who showed up. That matters." That was it. Nothing legal. Nothing concrete. But it hit me like a gut punch. He knew. He knew there would be problems. That Kyle would twist things. That Deborah would swarm like a vulture. And more than that, he was on my side. Day 3, Kyle let himself in again. This time, with a measuring tape and a guy named Greg, who apparently was a contractor. "You're hiring people now?" I asked from the hallway. "Yup," Kyle said, not even glancing at me. "Getting quotes. Gotta move fast once it's official." Greg nodded politely. "You the tenant?" Before I could respond, Kyle jumped in. "He's just squatting until Friday." I clenched my jaw. "I live here. This was my dad's house." Kyle finally turned to me with that smirk again. "Yeah, was." I didn't say another word. I just walked away. Again. Because what was the point of arguing with someone who wouldn't stop until the keys were in his hand and my things were on the curb? That night, I dug deeper. I stayed up until 3 a.m. combing through Dad's desk drawers, his locked cabinet in the garage, even his old email account. There were insurance papers, medical records, even an unsigned draft of a will from 3 years ago, one that left the house to me. But it wasn't notarized. It didn't count. Still, it confirmed what I already suspected. Kyle wasn't the favorite. He was the fallback. Dad must have started that draft when his health began declining, probably meaning to finish it. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he trusted someone to handle it. But something changed. Somewhere between that draft and the current will, something shifted. On day 4, the day of the will reading, I barely slept. My stomach was in knots. I arrived at Mr. Holbrook's office 20 minutes early. Kyle was already there, sipping a latte and scrolling on his phone. "You look nervous," he said without looking up. I didn't respond. He continued, "I wouldn't worry. Dad knew who deserved what." I turned to him slowly. "You mean the guy who visited once a year, maxed out Dad's emergency credit card, and didn't even show up for his last birthday?" Kyle laughed. "You're just mad because he loved me more." "No," I said. "I'm mad because you never earned any of it." Mr. Holbrook opened the door before things escalated further. "Gentlemen," he said, gesturing us in. "Let's begin." The office was small and quiet, with an old leather couch and a desk that looked like it had survived 3 generations. As we sat, I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me feared Kyle was telling the truth, that Dad, in some confused, guilt-ridden moment, had handed the house over to the son he never really knew. But then Holbrook opened the folder. He pulled out the documents, cleared his throat, and said, "I'll read the relevant portions aloud." Kyle leaned back, smug as ever. "To my son, Adam Charles Whitmore, I leave the house located at 117 Maple Drive, along with all contents therein, without condition or restriction." Kyle sat up. Holbrook kept reading. "In gratitude for his care, loyalty, and presence during the last years of my life." The room went silent. I couldn't move. Kyle's expression didn't change for a second. Then, slowly, his smirk collapsed like a building set for demolition. "What?" he finally said, voice cracking. "No, wait, that's not right. That's not what Dad told me." Holbrook looked up, calm as ever. "This will was signed, witnessed, and notarized last year. It supersedes any prior documents." "No," Kyle said again louder. "He promised me. He told me the house was mine." Holbrook raised an eyebrow. "Do you have documentation of that?" Kyle looked like he'd just been slapped. "No, but he said it. I moved things around for him. I helped with the fence." "You visited twice last year," I said quietly. "He told me." Kyle's eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time in forever, He didn't have a comeback. No quip. No sarcasm. Just stunned silence. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I didn't care. I looked at Holbrook, nodded once, and left the office without another word. I didn't need to see Kyle unravel, because now the power shift had begun. And Kyle? He wasn't going to take it gracefully. You'd think after the will was unsealed, that'd be the end of it. That Kyle would storm off, maybe throw a tantrum, maybe go silent for a while like he usually did when things didn't go his way. But what I didn't understand yet was that this wasn't just about the house for Kyle. It was about control. Power. He'd spent years spinning his own version of our family story, where he was the one Dad leaned on, the golden son, the one who would eventually inherit everything because it was owed to him. And now, that entire fantasy had collapsed in front of a lawyer with a 3-ring binder and a notarized document. That loss should have humbled him. Instead, it turned him into someone even worse. The moment I got home from Holbrook's office, I locked the front door for the first time in weeks. Not that I thought Kyle would break in or anything. I just needed a physical boundary. Something to make me feel safe in my own home again. I sat in the living room, in Dad's old recliner, staring at the framed photo of us on the mantel. Me at age 10, Dad holding up a lopsided birthday cake we'd baked together. It used to make me smile. Now it felt like a shield. A reminder that I wasn't crazy. That I was loved. That Dad had made his decision with intention. I didn't hear from Kyle for 2 days. Then, on the 3rd morning, I walked out to get the mail and found an envelope duct taped to the front door. Not slipped in the mailbox. Not even wedged into the doorframe. Taped. Inside was a single page. Typed. No greeting. No signature. You think you've won, but you're just playing dress-up in a house you didn't build. You don't deserve it. You never did. Enjoy it while it lasts. No return address. No name. But the phrasing, the venom, it was unmistakable. Kyle. I crumpled the letter and threw it in the trash, but the words stayed with me. Especially the last line. Enjoy it while it lasts. What did that mean? Over the next few days, I started noticing little things. The porch light bulb shattered one morning. Nothing unusual, maybe it was old. But then the motion sensor above the garage got knocked sideways. One of the garden planters was tipped over. And when I took the trash out one night, I found a trail of dried spaghetti noodles tossed across the driveway like someone had flung a Tupperware out their car window. Stupid stuff. Petty. But consistent. Kyle wasn't done. And Deborah? Oh, she was far from innocent. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, Mr. Barkley, our old neighbor across the street, that she'd been going around the neighborhood spreading rumors, saying I'd forged documents, that I manipulated a dying man to change his will, that I brainwashed my own father in his final days. She told the bakers down the street that I was dangerous, that they should keep their kids inside when I was around. Mind you, this was the same woman who once told my dad she couldn't stand the smell of mulch and never lifted a finger to help him tend the garden. But now she was knocking on doors like a political candidate, painting me as some scheming villain who'd stolen her son's inheritance. I could feel the shift. Neighbors who once waved went quiet. One lady I'd known for years crossed the street with her dog instead of walking past my house. It was isolating, humiliating, and it didn't stop there. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against the side of the house. Not the wind, not a raccoon. I got up, heart pounding, and peeked out the window. A shadow disappeared around the side of the garage. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside barefoot, adrenaline silencing any fear. I found a series of long, deep scratches carved into the siding, like someone had dragged a key across the entire length of the wall. My hands were shaking as I backed away. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was, Kyle, was long gone. The officer wrote up a report, said he'd patrol more frequently, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. No witnesses, no camera footage, just paranoia. But it wasn't paranoia. It was a message. The next morning, I found a tire on my car slashed. That was the tipping point. I went to the police again, filed another report. This time, I told them everything. The letter, the vandalism, the harassment. They nodded politely, promised to look into it. But without proof, without catching him in the act, there wasn't much they could do. So I installed cameras. One at the porch, one above the garage, one in the backyard, and one facing the driveway. It gave me peace of mind for a while. I even started to sleep through the night again. I told myself, it's over. He's given up. But Kyle wasn't just angry. He was planning something. A week later, I got a call from the county clerk's office. "Hi, Mr. Whitmore. We're following up on the recent change in your property status." I blinked. "I'm sorry." The woman cleared her throat. "There's a filing here indicating you've transferred the deed of 117 Maple Drive to another party." "What?" "No, I didn't file anything." There was a pause. "Are you sure? We received a notarized document." My blood ran cold. "No," I said again louder. "That's a mistake. I never signed anything." "Who submitted it?" She hesitated. I can't say over the phone, but we can schedule an in-person review." I was already grabbing my keys. When I got to the clerk's office and saw the paperwork, my stomach dropped. It looked official. My signature was at the bottom. My name, my handwriting, except it wasn't. It was a good fake. A really good fake. But I knew it wasn't mine. The notary seal was a name I didn't recognize. I demanded an investigation. Showed them my ID, proof of the will, my lawyer's number. After a tense hour, they finally flagged the transfer as fraudulent and put a hold on the deed. It could have worked. Kyle had forged a deed transfer. If I hadn't caught it in time, the house would have been gone. Sold. Transferred. Or worse, tied up in litigation for years. When I left the clerk's office, I wasn't angry. I was devastated. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't petty. This was a calculated betrayal by someone who shared my roof growing up. Someone who stood next to me at our father's funeral. Someone who'd looked me in the eye and smiled while plotting to steal the last piece of our father I had left. I sat in my car for over an hour in the parking lot, just staring at the steering wheel. How do you fight someone who has no shame, no conscience? Someone who thinks family is just another chess piece to knock over? I called Holbrook that night. Told him everything. He was furious. "That's not just fraud. That's a felony." I nodded slowly. "I want to press charges." He sighed. "Are you sure?" I paused. And then I said the words that changed everything. "Yes." Because something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I wasn't scared or confused or walking on eggshells. I was done. Kyle had declared war, and I was finally ready to fight back. But the next morning, I discovered something that stopped me cold. Because Kyle wasn't working alone. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat in the living room, lights off, staring at the front door like I expected it to creak open any second. My mind kept looping through everything. The vandalism, the slashed tire, the forged deed. All of it. I should have felt anger, maybe rage. But all I felt was exhaustion. Like the kind that settles in your bones and makes even breathing feel like effort. When I finally did fall asleep, if you could call it that, it was for a few restless hours on the couch, with the security feed flickering quietly on my phone beside me. Every creak of the old house made me flinch. Every distant car had me holding my breath. By morning, I thought maybe things would feel different. They didn't. What did feel different was the quiet. Too quiet. I stepped outside just after 7 a.m. to grab the newspaper. Yes, Dad still had one delivered, and paused at the sight of the front yard. The porch swing was gone. The chain still hung there, swaying slightly in the breeze. But the swing, the one Dad and I built together in the summer of '05, was gone. Ripped right off the bolts. I walked over in a daze. There were fresh tire marks on the curb, deep impressions in the dirt where something heavy had been dragged. I didn't need to guess. Kyle had stolen it. I wasn't sure how he managed it, maybe in the middle of the night, maybe while I was passed out, but it was gone. Like it never existed. Just one more piece of Dad, erased. I stood there for a long time. Longer than I probably should have. Then I went back inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, but I didn't move. I couldn't. That swing wasn't just wood and chain. It was the last place Dad and I sat together before his stroke. We drank iced tea and talked about nothing in particular. Cars, the NBA playoffs, whether or not he should finally replace the mailbox. That swing had been ours. Now it was probably in the back of Kyle's truck, being stripped for firewood or sold online to some clueless couple looking for a rustic vibe. That was the moment I hit bottom. Not when he faked my signature. Not when the cops shrugged me off. Not even when I found out the neighborhood was turning on me. It was when he took the swing. Because it wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasure. Kyle didn't just want the house. He wanted to scrub me out of it. Out of Dad's memory. Out of existence. I wish I could say I got up that day and stormed into battle. That I called the police again. That I made a scene. But I didn't. I stayed in that chair until the coffee went cold. That night, I turned off all the lights in the house. I didn't eat. I didn't even shower. I just sat on the floor in the hallway outside Dad's old room, back against the wall, knees up to my chest. I used to think hitting rock bottom was a dramatic phrase, something people said for effect. But it's not. It's terrifyingly quiet. And lonely. And so heavy. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I parked by the old oak near the north gate and walked the rest of the way. The grass was still fresh above Dad's grave. Someone, probably a neighbor, had left a small bouquet of white carnations. I sat beside it and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for days. "I'm trying, Dad," I whispered. The wind rustled softly through the trees. "I really am." And then I told him everything. About the forged deed. About the letter on the door. About the swing. I sat there for over an hour, speaking like he could hear me, like he'd somehow show up and fix it all like he used to when I was a kid and scraped my knee or blew a fuse in the garage. When I finally stood up to leave, something shifted in me. Not a light switch. More like the slow turning of a dial. I couldn't keep letting Kyle write this story. Couldn't keep playing defense in my own life. Because the more I sat still, the more space he took up. And I couldn't afford to lose anything else. So I started planning. Not revenge. Not yet. Just clarity. I spent that afternoon going through every legal document I had. I scanned the finalized will. Took photos of every corner. Backed it up to the cloud. I created a physical binder, a digital folder, and a private flash drive I stashed under the floorboard in the closet. Paranoid? Maybe. But I wasn't taking chances. Then I made a list. A physical one. I labeled it "What Kyle Doesn't Know." At the top, the cameras are recording. I spoke to Holbrook. I have the forged deed. I have the cemetery security footage. Yes, that was something I hadn't expected. See, the cemetery has security cameras. I only found that out after chatting with one of the groundskeepers while walking back to the car. Friendly older guy named Mike. He mentioned the swing theft in passing. Said he'd seen a truck parked near my house around 2 a.m., hauling something large and wooden. Didn't look like a moving day, he said with a shrug. So I asked, casually, if the cemetery had surveillance. He said yes. 3 mounted cams by the streetlights and 1 pointing toward the entrance gate. Bingo. I didn't push right then. Just smiled, thanked him, and made a mental note to follow up later. One step at a time. I stayed quiet for the next few days. Didn't respond to Kyle's texts. He'd started sending them again. Passive-aggressive stuff like, "Hope you're taking care of my future kitchen, and have you figured out how to mow the lawn without Dad yet?" I didn't bite. I just observed. Watched the security feeds. Recorded timestamps. Logged license plates. Deborah visited once. Parked at the curb for 10 minutes. Just sitting in her car, engine idling. I watched from the upstairs window. She never came to the door. Just stared at the house. Then she drove away. That same night, I found a chip of paint scraped off the back door. Looked like someone had tried to pry it open. My stomach turned cold. They weren't done. But neither was I. I called the locksmith the next morning. Upgraded every lock. Changed the mailbox. Installed a deadbolt on the garage side door. Then I visited the cemetery again. Spoke to Mike. Brought him a coffee and a dozen donuts. "Think I could take a peek at that footage?" I asked. He raised a brow. "You got a badge I should know about?" I smiled. Just trying to protect what's left of my dad. That softened him. The footage didn't show much, grainy, low-res, but it caught a truck stopping near the curb of my house just before 2:17 a.m. 2 figures got out. One tall, one shorter. Kyle and Deborah, almost certainly. They loaded something large and wooden into the bed of the truck, then drove off. Time-stamped. Dated. It wasn't smoking gun quality, but it was a start. I downloaded it onto a flash drive and added it to the hidden floorboard stash, along with copies of the forged deed, the threatening letter, and screenshots of every harassment text Kyle had sent in the past 2 months. I was building a case. Quietly. Steadily. Because Kyle thought I was weak. Thought I'd crumble. Thought I'd just take the hits until he finally broke me. But the truth? I wasn't broken. I was angry. And slowly, that anger was becoming something else. Focus. Resolve. Purpose. I wasn't sure what my next move would be yet, but I knew one thing. Kyle had stolen a swing. But I was about to take away everything he thought he had. And just when I felt ready to take the first step, the betrayal hit me harder than everything before. Because what I discovered next wasn't about Kyle. It was about Dad. And it changed everything I thought I knew about the last year of his life. It started with a box I didn't recognize. I'd been digging through the garage, my dad's old territory, packed to the rafters with tools, bolts, rusted chains, and things he swore he'd get around to fixing. I was trying to catalog everything, mostly to keep my mind focused and stay ahead of Kyle's next move, when I spotted a weathered crate tucked behind the water heater. No labels, no markings, just dust and old tape that peeled like dry skin when I touched it. Inside, I found something I didn't expect: journals. Not the kind with teenage scribbles or grocery lists, but hardbound notebooks filled with my dad's tight, slanted handwriting. The first one I opened was dated almost a year and a half before he passed, and within 10 minutes of flipping through it, I realized my father had been documenting everything: his thoughts, his doubts, his fears, and most importantly, his concerns. Page after page, he wrote about Kyle. About how Kyle kept asking for money, calling with half-baked business schemes, and complaining that I was manipulating him by spending too much time at the house. There were entries about Deborah too, how she'd suggested Dad move into assisted living so the boys wouldn't argue about inheritance. One passage stuck with me more than the rest. Kyle said I should sell the house before I die. Said Adam could find an apartment if he needed. It was the first time I felt afraid of my own son. My stomach twisted reading that. He hadn't told me, never showed it, but he knew. He knew Kyle was circling like a hawk, and that I was the only one staying, fixing leaks, driving him to his appointments, watching the news with him on quiet Thursday nights when he could barely keep his eyes open. By the fifth journal, I found something else. A business card, paper clipped to a page with one line scribbled under it. For Adam. When it's time. It belonged to a man named Elliot Tran, an estate attorney. Not Holbrook. Someone new. I stared at the card for a long time. My heart thumped against my ribs like it was trying to send me a message. Was there another will? Another document my dad had prepared just in case? I didn't wait. I called Elliot the next morning. Elliot Tran was a soft-spoken man with round glasses and a voice like a therapist. When I explained who I was and why I was calling, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Your father told me you'd reach out. Eventually." That floored me. "I have something I think you need to see," he added. We met the following day at his office, a modest brick building across town with ivy climbing the side and a sleepy receptionist who offered me lemon water. Elliot greeted me with a gentle smile and handed me a sealed envelope as soon as I sat down. Inside was a letter from my dad. Typed. Signed. Dated exactly 1 month before his death. "Adam, I know how hard this has been. You've carried more than I ever expected, and you've done it without complaint. If you're reading this, it means Kyle is still trying to take what isn't his. Maybe Deborah too. I tried to believe they'd change, but I was wrong. Enclosed is an addendum. It doesn't change your inheritance, but it makes one thing clear. They are to receive nothing." I spoke to Elliot after my last stroke. I knew I might not make it to finalize everything with Holbrook. So this document supplements the main will. It's legal, enforceable, and it names you as executor, with full power to challenge any claims. You were always my son, not just by blood, but by character. Finish what I started. Dad. I was speechless. Elliot handed me the addendum next, formally signed, notarized, and legally binding. It reiterated my full ownership of the house, and went further. It disinherited Kyle and Deborah entirely. No contest clause. If they challenged anything, they'd forfeit any chance of financial gain. And it appointed me executor with full authority to handle my father's estate as I saw fit. That moment changed everything. I had power now. Real, legal, enforceable power. And it was time to use it. I spent the next 2 weeks rebuilding. Not the house, me. I got back to my daily routines. Morning walks. Fresh groceries. I started sleeping with my bedroom window open again, listening to the wind rustle through the trees Dad planted. I fixed the creaking floorboard outside his bedroom, not because I had to, but because it made the house feel alive again. I called my old friend Anthony, he owns a landscaping company, and asked if he could help me restore the front yard. Not just mow the grass, but really bring it back to life. Flower beds. New gravel for the path. We even planted a new tree to replace the one that had died during last year's drought. I was turning the house into a home again. My home. And Kyle? He didn't know what was coming. I compiled everything. The threatening letter. The fake deed. The graveyard footage. The vandalism reports. Deborah's smear campaign, including voice recordings I secretly got from neighbors. The text messages, emails, security cam screenshots. And now, the notarized addendum and my official designation as executor. Elliot helped me prepare a formal cease and desist letter. It was thick, brutal, legalese weaponized. We mailed it via certified delivery to Kyle and Deborah both. 3 days later, Kyle called me. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. You think this makes you strong? Hiding behind lawyers? You're nothing without Dad. Then, 3 hours later, another voicemail, this one quieter. Come on, Adam. Let's just talk. I didn't respond to that either. Not anymore. Because I wasn't playing his game. I was rewriting the rules. One morning, about a week after the letter was delivered, I stepped onto the porch to grab the newspaper and froze. The swing was back. It sat exactly where it used to, bolted into the frame, chains glinting in the morning sun. A single white carnation rested on the seat. No note. No message. But I knew. Kyle was trying to backpedal. I stared at it for a long time before sitting down. It creaked slightly, same as always. And for the first time since Dad passed, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. Kyle was losing his grip. The control he used to lord over me for years, gone. He knew the law was on my side. That the neighbors were slowly learning the truth. That I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was growing. Rebuilding. Winning. I called the cemetery that day and paid to have the gravesite landscaped. I had a proper bench installed, with a plaque that read, "For the man who built everything." Hey, I visited every week after that. And each time I went, I brought a single white carnation. Because while Kyle tried to rip our family apart, I was putting it back together, piece by piece. And then, just as the dust began to settle, I got the call that changed everything again. From Holbrook. You might want to come in, he said. Why? I asked. His voice was tense, uneasy. There's been an incident. When Holbrook called, I was cleaning out the upstairs hallway closet. The one filled with random junk, spare light bulbs, winter coats, a broken vacuum cleaner Dad refused to throw out. I had dust on my sleeves and sweat on my back when the phone rang. His voice was calm, but something in his tone made my chest tighten. There's been an incident. My fingers froze on the closet handle. What kind of incident? I asked, barely above a whisper. There was a pause on the other end. Then Holbrook said, It involves your stepbrother, and it's serious enough that you should come in today. 10 minutes later, I was driving across town, mind racing. I didn't know what to expect. Had Kyle been arrested? Had he tried to pull another stunt with the will? Or worse, had he finally pushed things far enough to land himself in jail? When I stepped into Holbrook's office, he was already waiting. He gestured for me to close the door, and I did. There's something you need to see, he said. He handed me a manila folder. Inside were photos, paperwork, copies of legal correspondence. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. Then I saw the header, Petition for Emergency Injunction, Property Dispute, filed by Kyle Eastman, against Adam Whitmore. He was trying again, trying to reverse the will, challenge the addendum, claim coercion and elder abuse. He'd filed it through a different lawyer, some shark from downtown who specialized in aggressive inheritance defense. The kind of guy who advertised on billboards with slogans like, "You deserve more." Holbrook leaned back in his chair, arms folded. He's pushing for a hearing. Claims you manipulated your father into signing the second document. Says you isolated him from the rest of the family. I stared at the papers, while rising in my throat. He's lying. I know, Holbrook said. But lies have a way of gaining traction if you don't bury them early. What do we do? Holbrook nodded toward the folder. We fight it. I've already contacted Elliot. We're working together now. That caught me off guard. Wait, you and Elliot? You're teaming up. He sent me your father's addendum and the journals. The writing's consistent. The dates match. More importantly, the notary who signed the addendum? She's worked with me before. Completely credible. Kyle doesn't have a leg to stand on. I exhaled, a slow, unsteady breath. But this does change the game, Holbrook added. Because now it's not just petty harassment. He's escalating. And we need to respond accordingly. That's when something shifted inside me again. Like a puzzle piece clicking into place. I'm done playing defense, I said. It's time I go on the offensive. Holbrook gave me a slow smile. I was hoping you'd say that. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of ammunition I had. The journals? I scanned them all. Sent copies to Holbrook and Elliot. The graveyard footage? I had it enhanced. Nothing major, just enough to highlight the figures and timestamp. It wouldn't win an Oscar for clarity, But it proved Kyle and Deborah were on the property at 2 a.m. the night the swing disappeared. I also visited the neighbors, one by one. Politely. Casually. I didn't accuse anyone of anything, just dropped in for friendly check-ins. Turns out, gossip spreads fast when you actually listen. One neighbor, Mrs. Nguyen, revealed that Kyle had come to her house twice claiming ownership of the property and asking if she'd be open to selling her lot if he decided to flip the neighborhood. Another, Mr. Barkley, told me he'd seen Kyle snooping around the side of my garage the week before the forged deed showed up. I started keeping a detailed timeline, down to the hour, of every move Kyle made. Every rumor. Every document. But the real turning point came from an unexpected place. A memory. I was back in the attic one afternoon, going through a dusty box of VHS tapes, when I found an old camcorder. One of those chunky black ones with the flip-out screen and side handle. Dad had used it for birthdays and holidays, mostly, but this one had a tape still inside. I popped it into the TV downstairs, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. It was a recording from the year before he died. I remembered the day vaguely. Dad had asked me to fix the sink in the kitchen while he sat at the table with his tea. I didn't know he was recording. In the video, I'm hunched over the sink, cursing quietly, off mic, thank God, while Dad is talking softly to the camera. If you're watching this, Adam, he says, I hope you already know everything I wanted to tell you. But just in case something happens, just in case Kyle or Deborah start circling like vultures, I want this on record. He looks right at the lens. You took care of me. You were there when no one else was. You gave me dignity. You let me die with peace. You deserve this house. You deserve everything I can leave behind. And if anyone tells you otherwise, tell them they're wrong. I sat there in stunned silence as the tape ended. It wasn't legal, but it was powerful, emotional, authentic, undeniable. I converted it to digital that same night. Saved copies to the cloud. Backed it up 3 different ways. And just like that, I had something Kyle could never fake. Proof, not just of Dad's intent, but of who I really was. The opposite of what Kyle was claiming. And I wasn't the only one starting to realize it. A week later, I received an invitation I didn't expect. The Homeowners Association was having a quarterly meeting, first one since Dad passed. I'd never gone before. Dad used to handle it. But now, as the sole property owner of 117 Maple Drive, I had a seat. I showed up in a clean shirt, fresh haircut, and with a binder under my arm. People noticed. Some waved. Some avoided eye contact. But a few, the ones who'd been cold to me after Deborah's little whisper campaign, actually came up to say hello. Apologized, even. Said they'd heard both sides now. Turns out, the cease and desist letters had done more than just scare Kyle. They made me look credible, professional, respectable. At the meeting, when I spoke about fixing up the house, restoring the garden, and honoring Dad's legacy, I saw heads nodding. People clapped. One guy even asked if I considered joining the HOA board next year. I smiled politely, but inside, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Because every alliance I formed, every person I brought back to my side, was one less place Kyle could run. He was losing allies fast, and I was gaining power. Back home that night, I stood on the porch, looking out at the street where it all started. The swing creaked gently in the wind beside me. The house was quiet, peaceful, mine, all mine. But I wasn't done yet. Because earlier that day, I'd also received a copy of something else, sent anonymously to my lawyer's office. A printed email chain between Kyle and his lawyer, discussing the forged deed. One line stood out in particular. As long as Adam doesn't find the original notary, we should be fine. If he pushes, I can say Dad was hallucinating. That one sentence was enough to dismantle everything he'd been trying to build. And I wasn't going to waste it. I turned to go back inside, but before I did, I looked up at the sky, stars just beginning to peek out. Almost there, Dad, I whispered. Because the stage was set. The players were in position. And Kyle had no idea the final act was about to begin. The courtroom was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence you get right before the first drop of rain, or the split second after someone tells the truth too loud. I sat on the left side, next to Holbrook and Elliot, dressed in a dark navy suit Dad had bought me years ago. I never wore it. Never had a reason. But this felt like the day. The day I'd stopped playing defense. The day I stopped letting Kyle kick down doors in the name of entitlement. And on the right side of the room, Kyle sat stiffly in a chair he clearly thought was a throne. Beside him, His smarmy lawyer, Leon Friedman, the guy from the billboard downtown. He wore too much cologne and had the expression of someone who thought he was the smartest man in the room by default. I wondered how much Kyle had paid him to twist reality into something palatable. Or maybe he offered a cut of the inheritance that was never going to be his. The judge, a tired but sharp-eyed woman named Mendez, entered, and everyone stood. The moment her gavel hit the wood, the room was hers. "Let's proceed," she said. Kyle's lawyer started with flair, painting me as the manipulative stepson who took advantage of a vulnerable elderly man and systematically isolated him from his rightful heirs. It would have been funny if it weren't so infuriating. He pulled out photos of me and Dad at home, claiming it showed undue influence. He referenced Dad's stroke, called into question his mental capacity, said things like, "My client was denied reasonable access, and this situation screams of emotional exploitation." I didn't react. Not once. Because that was the trap. Kyle wanted me to look shaken, angry, guilty. I wasn't giving him that. When it was our turn, Hallbrook stood, calm and steady. He spoke like he was telling a bedtime story. Patient. Precise. He walked the judge through the timeline, showed her the original will and the addendum, explained how the notary had been vetted and licensed. He referenced my father's journals, noting their consistency in tone, content, and chronology. Then Elliot added the real punch. "Your Honor," he said, "we have a video recorded by the deceased approximately 1 year before his passing. It was not made for legal purposes, but it is, without question, a first-hand account of his mental state and his intentions." The judge nodded. "Let's see it." The courtroom darkened as Elliot set up the screen, and then my father's voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, Adam, I hope you already know everything I wanted to tell you." The courtroom was silent. You could hear a pin drop. Kyle shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His lawyer whispered something to him. The tape kept rolling. By the time it ended, Judge Mendez leaned back in her chair and let out a long breath. She looked at Kyle, then at me, then back at the screen. "Thank you," she said softly. "Let's continue." But the air had changed. We'd won the room, and it wasn't over yet. Outside the courthouse, Kyle tried to play the victim card one last time. "You set this up," he said, chasing after me in the parking lot. "You're not better than me, Adam. You're just sneakier." I stopped, turned to face him, and said nothing for a moment. Then I smiled. "You forged a legal deed." He flinched. "You vandalized the house. You tried to turn the neighborhood against me. And you didn't even care when Dad died. You just saw it as a payday." His eyes darted to his lawyer approaching from behind. "You're going to regret this," he muttered. "No," I said. "You will." And I walked away. The final blow came 2 weeks later. I'd been waiting on it, ever since Elliot quietly suggested we escalate. Because forgery? That's not just a civil issue. That's criminal. We'd submitted everything to the local DA, videos, reports, forged documents, and that lovely email chain between Kyle and his lawyer discussing the backup plan if I found out about the fraud. Apparently, Leon Friedman hadn't known Kyle forwarded that to me in a moment of desperation. And once the DA saw it, game over. Kyle was arrested at his apartment, charged with 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of attempted grand theft, and obstruction. The mugshot showed up online the next day. My phone exploded with texts. Even Mrs. Nguyen from down the street sent a gif of someone dropping a mic. Deborah tried calling too, 6 times in a row. I let them all ring out, then blocked her number. Because this was mine now. All of it. In the weeks that followed, everything shifted. Neighbors who once whispered started waving again. The HOA asked me to speak at their next event, honoring legacies in our community. I repainted the front door, replaced the broken mailbox. I even found a craftsman to restore the porch swing Kyle stole and returned, rebuilding it stronger than ever. And one evening, I sat on that swing, just after sunset, and smiled for the first time in what felt like a year. The house was quiet, safe, and full of memories that belonged to me and no one else. Not Kyle, not Deborah, not their lawyers, just me. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's measured, patient, sometimes it's legal, and sometimes it's just a man sitting on a porch swing, holding a cup of tea, finally at peace. But then, just as the dust had finally settled, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a photo of my dad, from before he got sick, standing next to a stranger, and a note. "You don't know everything, Adam. Not yet." My heart thudded. Because the man in the photo? He wasn't from our town. He wasn't family. But I'd seen his face once before. In a photo frame my dad always kept locked in his bottom drawer. And I'd never known why. Until now. The photo haunted me. I stared at it for hours that night, turning it over in my hands, analyzing every detail. My dad stood there, younger, thinner, smiling in a way I hadn't seen him smile in years. Not since Mom died. Beside him, a man with sharp cheekbones and a long face stood with one hand on Dad's shoulder, the other holding a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints. They looked familiar, like the ones Dad used to draft for the house's second-floor addition. The photo wasn't recent. I could tell by the grain of the paper, the faded corners, the outfits. This had to be 20, maybe 25 years old. But what chilled me wasn't the man himself. It was the date scribbled in pencil on the back. July 3rd, 2002. Finalized it all. Finalized what? And who sent this? I spent the next 3 days combing through old boxes, searching for that frame I'd seen in Dad's drawer. Always locked, always hidden. I eventually found it in a shoe box under the floorboards in his bedroom. Same photo. But this one had a sticky note folded behind the back panel. I unfolded it with trembling hands. Adam, if something ever goes wrong, find Richard Voss. He'll know where to look. The name hit me like a freight train. Richard Voss, the architect Dad worked with on the house redesign. I remembered hearing that name once, maybe twice, years ago. But I'd never met him, never even thought to ask. That night, I stayed up until 3 a.m. doing a deep dive. Voss had moved out of state, retired quietly. But after enough digging, I found a contact email. I typed out a long message, explained who I was, and asked, "What exactly did you finalize with my father in 2002? The reply came the next morning. Short, direct, happy to talk. He asked me to draft a transfer. Something off the books. Meet me. We set a date. I drove 6 hours to his home in the mountains. Richard was in his 70s now, white beard, sun-damaged skin, but sharp as ever. We sat on his back porch, the sun dipping behind pine trees, and he handed me a single sheet of paper from an old manila folder. It was a trust agreement. Not just any trust, a living trust. Dated July 3rd, 2002. It had one beneficiary, me, and it didn't just include the house. It included the land it sat on. What Kyle didn't know, what Dad never told him, was that the house and the lot were never officially tied together. Back in 2002, after Mom's death, Dad bought the adjacent parcel under a different LLC, quietly, to protect it, and placed it in the trust, locked away with my name on it. Kyle had tried to steal the house, but the foundation, the land beneath it, had always been mine. Legally, irrevocably. Richard handed me a key. He stored the originals in a safe deposit box under your name. It's at Marlowe Community Bank. I helped him set it up. I barely spoke the entire drive home. The next morning, I visited the bank, verified the credentials, and opened the box. Inside were the originals. Signed, notarized, sealed in plastic. Alongside them was a second envelope. Another letter. You're probably angry I didn't tell you about this. I wanted to. But sometimes, protecting someone means preparing them for the worst without scaring them. I always knew Kyle would come back. The house is only part of it. The land, the title, the trust, it's all yours. Always has been. If they push you, don't break. You don't owe them anything. You were never the backup plan. Dad, I walked out of the bank that day with my spine straighter, my breath easier. Kyle hadn't just lost. He had never stood a chance. The court date for his fraud case finally arrived. I didn't testify. I didn't need to. The prosecution had the forged deed, the email trail, the video evidence, and the digital copies of the trust showing clear, premeditated attempts to mislead the court and steal protected assets. Kyle's lawyer dropped him 3 days before the hearing. Deborah tried to intervene, filed a statement claiming family pressure and emotional confusion. The judge tossed it without comment. Kyle took a plea deal. 2 years probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent criminal record. Fraud, forgery, attempted grand theft. But that wasn't the part that broke him. The part that did was public. See, Kyle worked freelance for a local tech consultancy. Nothing major, but enough to keep up appearances. After his arrest, they dropped him. Word got out fast. LinkedIn, wiped. Clients, vanished. He tried to rebrand. Of course, changed his profile photo, renamed his LLC. But in a small town, reputations rot fast. Deborah went quiet too. The rumors she started unraveled once the real story came out. People she once gossiped with started avoiding her. I heard through the grapevine she moved to a condo in the next county, sold her house at a loss just to get out of the spotlight. She sent me a letter once. A single line. "You'll regret ruining this family." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. A few months later, I hosted a barbecue at the house. Not a big one. Just a few neighbors, some coworkers, and Anthony from the landscaping company. We grilled on the back patio, under the warm glow of string lights, and someone brought out a speaker to play old Motown tracks. At one point, I walked out to the porch, sat on the swing, and just listened to the laughter, the music, the life, my life. Because that house, it had been born from pain, shaped by grief, stolen, nearly, by blood. But I took it back. I protected what mattered. And in the end, I proved what Dad always believed. You don't inherit character. You build it. One fight at a time. One choice at a time. One porch swing at a time. And that swing, it still creaked when I leaned back. But now, it sounded like peace.